Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be talking about Saturn in Taurus and Saturn in the second house. So this video is going to be broken up into a couple of different parts. So if you look down the description box below, you're going to see when I talk about what. So it's going to be specifically what Saturn means in astrology and in your birth chart, as well as Saturn in Taurus, and then obviously Saturn in the second house. So we're going to be kind of going through all three of those segments. If you guys are new to my channel, hi, my name is Brandon. I do astrology videos, and I'm going through this entire Taurus series. This is the final video in my Taurus series, second house series, and it has been a doozy, and I'm really excited to see how this video is received and how you guys kind of work with this video, because there's so many things within this, specifically Saturn in Taurus and Saturn in the second house, that has a lot of depth, and I think it's really awesome that Saturn is the last one always in this series. So I'm really excited to be doing this today. There's gonna be a lot of different things we're gonna be talking about. If you guys are new to astrology and don't know if you even have Saturn in Taurus or Saturn in the second house, like, what is he talking about? Obviously, look down the description box. There's going to be some information on that, about your birth chart and where those things are placed, right? Because we don't necessarily know if our Saturn's in Taurus or if our Saturn's in the second house, but if you put your information in, then you will find those things out, and then you can kind of have a better idea. And so this video also does kind of apply a little bit to those that are Sagittarius and Capricorn risings, as Saturn will also kind of have more of a connection to that second house, but that's more of the second house Saturn portion of the video. But anyway, that's pretty much all I want to say for the beginning here. This is a super fun series. Also, too, if you have any planets in Aries as well, there's going to be a playlist down below. And then eventually, as all these series come out, they will be listed in the description box below as well, with the playlist of that sign/house that's associated with it. So feel free to look down there below if you have anything in the subsequent houses that will be coming out. And if not, obviously subscribe to my channel as those things come out. We're going to be talking about, the next time it's going to be Gemini, Cancer, so on and so forth. So looking forward to getting back into this series. And with that, I guess we're going to move on to talk about specifically what Saturn means in astrology. So Saturn in astrology has a lot of different implications to it, a lot of different things that it does within a birth chart, okay? And Saturn is a very heavy karmic planet. It is one of those planets that rules responsibility, it rules weight, it rules time. It is associated with Kronos, the father of time, and it has a lot to do with the hard-working, long-standing lessons that we have, more specifically in a grounded, earthly sense. So when we think about Saturn, we think about delays, we think about difficulties, we think about things that we don't really get access to right away, because we don't have the experience for it, we don't have the age under our belt, right? That's a lot of the things with Saturn, it's delayed gratification, it is delays in general, but it is also like the biggest karmic debt repayer as you go through and utilize your Saturn placement. And in this video, we're obviously going to be talking about Saturn in Taurus and Saturn in the second house, but there is a lot of other Saturn placements, obviously, and it's one of the bigger planets to kind of pay attention to in regards to your birth chart, and it will tell you a lot about, like I had said, your karma while you're here, your earthly kind of responsibilities, if you will. And it also does rule responsibilities. It rules things that feel like huge uphill battles, but as you keep going up those uphills, you realize that the weight is getting easier to carry, or the hill is getting easier. You are getting stronger through that kind of arduous, difficult task that Saturn is making you do. And so Saturn is really important in that way. There's a lot of things that happen during the Saturn return, which is around the age of 28 to 30 or so, which will coincide with when Saturn returns to where it was when you were born, in the same sign in the sky. And so it's important to recognize that when that Saturn return happens, a lot of that weight lifting off of you will tend to happen. There will be a new chapter in responsibility, a new chapter within yourself in what you want to get done and how you're going to get those things done. And Saturn has a lot of weight to it, a lot of it also rules things like depression, things of like never seen, like the optimism. It's a very, it's a more bleak planet, if you will, but it can give you really, really solid, very solid gains and very solid support and foundation. It's probably one of the most solid foundational planets you can possibly think of when it comes to financial, physical wealth and physical, vitality and things. So there's a lot with that. Also, the thing I want to add too, I kind of said this in the other videos I've done, relative to like Venus, Jupiter, and Mars. But Saturn is more important for you if you are actually born at night, because when you are born either during the day or the night, there's this thing called sect in astrology, and I should make a whole video on that, but it's not really my branch of astrology. I don't really work with it super heavily. If you want to, there's plenty of YouTube videos on sect that you can look up, and that's S-E-C-T. You can look that up, and it specifically talks about whether you're born during the day or during the night, how your chart will kind of be laid out, meaning that in daytime charts, certain planets are going to have more of a positive influence or a more constructive influence, and then others are going to have a less positive influence and a more destructive influence in that. And that's really speaking on the main malefics being Mars and Saturn, and the benefics being Venus and Jupiter. And so for those of us that have a day chart, meaning that the sun is above the horizon line, so between houses 12 and 7, the more positive benefic is going to be Jupiter, and the more constructive, the more constructive and more wealth bringing malefic is going to be Saturn in a daytime chart. And then on the inverse of that, for the less benefic and more malefic planets, for a daytime chart, it's going to be Venus and Mars, and then it's reversed in the nighttime. And like I said, this is not a thing I really talk about a lot. It's not something I really focus on. So feel free to check out any sect videos on astrology, because there's a lot there. But when it comes to being born at night, it's the opposite. So if you're born at night, Saturn is going to have more of a destructive influence, and Jupiter is going to have a less benefic influence than it would if you were born during the day. And then if you're born at night as well, Venus is going to have a lot more positive influence, and Mars is going to have a lot more constructive influence in that regard. So it's important to kind of see what sect you're in, because if you're born during the day, Saturn is going to have a lot more positive things that it's going to do for you, a lot more constructive things that it's going to kind of like lift those weights off in that way. And if you're born at night, Saturn will still do those things, but it may be something that might take a little bit more time, or there might be a little bit of a, within a more of a quarrel or more of an issue or more of a kind of more of a shakeup in that regard. So that's something I want to just bring up in regard to this. But like I said, feel free to watch any videos on YouTube about sect in astrology. So it's that. I'm going to move on to the next part. We're going to talk about what it means to have Saturn in the sign of Taurus. Okay, so we see Saturn in the sign of Taurus. There's a lot of interesting things we see with this, because when we talk about Saturn in Taurus, there is this delayed gratification, right, that Saturn brings. And Saturn is all about restriction. It's all about not necessarily getting what we want right away. And I think when it comes to it being in Taurus, it's almost easier for Saturn to function this way. And when I say easier, I mean it's a lot more straightforward, because Saturn likes to restrict. Saturn likes to teach you your lesson of management, and what better thing to do that on than like your resources and your money and your savings account and what you own, right? Your physical assets, because that's what Taurus rules. And so Saturn in Taurus is going to have this kind of like quality to it of, and I talk about this all the time when I talk about Saturn in Taurus, but it's this like very needing to have like an old beater car for a really long time, like having a really crappy vehicle or a really crappy, living situation or something for a while. And then Saturn, inevitably, as you've learned your lesson of managing that beater or, managing your finances or managing the minimal things you've had, it will then give you more. And it will say, okay, you've worked your car to the absolute bone. There's no more left in the car. It's gone. Then it will then say, okay, now you're deserving of this thing. So it's a lot about worth and deserving with Saturn in Taurus. We'll see it in a little bit different with Saturn in the second house, but these things do kind of overlap with delineations in a certain way. So when we see Saturn in Taurus too, there is this story here of worth and how you build your worth. And a lot of people build their worth through what they own, what they have, right? What physical things they have, their bank account, right? And when you think about Saturn in Taurus, it's going to want you to have very lavish things, want you to have very rich experiences, want you to be very rich, and you more than likely will be as you grow up and as you kind of progress in life. You will inevitably kind of sustain that kind of solid financial foundation that you built prior. Unless Saturn is really, not really placed well, like has issues with, Mars being there or other things that may kind of flavor it a little bit heavier, like Venus squaring it or something. But at the end of the day, Saturn really, really wants you to appreciate every step of the way to the success that you are inevitable in getting. Because Saturn will inevitably give you success after the age of like 30, 32. And it's about being patient in that process, being patient in the struggle, right? It's kind of like appreciating the come up too. There's a lot of that, where we see that a lot with Saturn and Taurus, like started from the bottom, and kind of working your way up to the top. And that's because you've learned those lessons that Saturn wanted you to learn as you kind of went through it. And there's a lot of stories of Saturn and Tauruses that after their Saturn return are quite wealthy and have a lot of financial success and a lot of value that they've been able to secure. And I think when Saturn's in the sign of Taurus, there is this very interesting financial responsibility that comes with Saturn and Taurus that isn't necessarily the same in Saturn in the second house. It can be, but it's a little bit different with Saturn in the second house because it speaks more on like resources. But when it comes to Saturn and Taurus, it's about really like knowing exactly what your value is that you're giving to the world and really building that up over and over again. And I think Saturn in the second house has a little bit more of a what are your resources, right? And really knowing what resources you're using. Whereas Saturn and Taurus can be quite literally just the physical, tangible things. And I think there is kind of an overlap with those things because it is important to know what your resources are. But I think when it comes to Saturn and Taurus, it's a lot about specifically the physical part of stuff, because that's what Taurus rules. It rules the physical things, the physical value. It also rules what you eat too. This is also seen with Saturn in the second, but there's this, there's more of a delay with your senses. It's almost like Saturn and Taurus, you want to experience all these very sensory things, and Saturn may restrict that sensory experience, may not allow you to have the finest foods or have the richest experiences or, have the finer clothes that you want to have. And it wants you to kind of, maybe work or see in a, I don't know why I keep seeing this image of like a sweatshop in my head, but that's kind of what I'm getting this idea of, like a sweatshop. But maybe it's like you create your own sweatshop because you want to be like a world-class designer and you start working on those things. It's very much that. It's like working around like, very poor conditions and very difficult financial conditions, and then eventually changing those things and changing that trajectory through the hard work and the resource management and the responsibility that you've built over time with Saturn being in Taurus. And also too, it's the thing about Saturn and Taurus, and I this is the same for Saturn in the second house, because by the way, I meant to add that I have Saturn in the second house, so this is going to be a very interesting video when I get to that portion. But Saturn, both Saturn and Taurus and Saturn in the second house, they have this this concept around, I just lost where I was going in my head, but this concept around tangible responsibility, physical kind of worth and developing that worth and managing your finances every step of the way. And Saturn almost will like applaud you in very minimal ways, but when you go through your Saturn return, it'll kind of say, okay, you've built this savings account, you can now do this with it, right? And that's the thing with Saturn and Taurus too. It's a lot about using your money for really powerful things and also investing your money. I would say that to anyone with Saturn and Taurus, Saturn in the second house, invest at a young age. Work on that, because that will help you so much in the long run. That's what Saturn wants. So Saturn's like, okay, set up a 401k, set up a savings account, set up, a Roth IRA, an investment account, those sorts of things. Set up things that are reoccurring investments, and Saturn will be like, yeah, we got you. That's good, right? And it'll keep kind of helping you out. So that's definitely something that is important. The other thing I was going to say about both Saturn and Taurus, Saturn in the second house, is that there's this aspect of it that it's almost like you don't almost have anything. You might have to like scrape by financially, but you will always have enough, and it might just be barely. Trust me, I've been there, but it might just be barely for you to get through, right? Where you're barely scraping by. You have to literally scrape pennies out of things. You have to, really, really work really hard just to pay the bare minimum, right? And so there's a lot of lack mentality that we see with Saturn and Taurus and Saturn in the second house. And I think there's a lot of reframing of that I think is really important. As a Saturn second houser myself, I think there's a big lesson that I have around reframing that, and I'll get to that in my own personal experience when I get to Saturn second house. But Saturn and Taurus, you guys have this really rich inner world, and it's a lot about you building a solid value and being responsible with the value that you're providing to the world too. So kind of like if you're making money through, let's say, doing astrology, right? You need to be the most responsible with your work that you're doing, with what you're making your money with, right? So yes, it's important to be responsible with the money that you receive. That's very obviously Saturn and Taurus, but also it's a lot about being responsible with with how you make your money, I guess is what I should say. Because Saturn and Taurus can have can make money in a bunch of different ways. But if you make it in the very traditional, systemic, sort of capitalist, way, and when I say capitalist, I don't mean capitalist way in the exploitative sense, that extreme. It can happen with Saturn and Taurus, but I don't really see that because I don't think they're really allowed to do that, honestly. Unless they're much older and they have other aspects and whatever. But point is that Saturn wants you to kind of do things in a more traditional sense with money. And I think there can be, especially during the Saturn return, there could be a lot of money that just comes out of the blue and you're like, oh, I didn't know I had that. I didn't know I had these resources. I didn't know I had these things to work with. I didn't know I understood, that I was worth this. There could be a lot of pay raise questions too. That's another thing with Saturn and Taurus. Asking for a pay raise. Ask for a pay raise. Raise your value. Your value is worth it. You need to be able to sustain yourself. And I think as you go through and create a budget, and as you go through and understand exactly how much you need, what the bare minimum is, Saturn will reward you, because once you are able to stand in that responsibility and say, I've done the work, this is what I've done, this is how I've tried to figure it out, and you go and approach, your boss or whatever you're working for and try and move towards making more money, Saturn will be like, okay, you've done the work, you're deserving of that, right? And so there's a lot to be said on Saturn and Taurus. I think you guys have such a beauty within you, and it's this very slow beauty, right? It's and I say this almost every time with the Taurus placements here, but it's almost like this planting of a seed. And it's if you could plant a seed that is a, pure gold, that will give you pure gold. It's a golden tree, right? Or something of that effect. This is a really good analogy, actually. You would have to plant that seed years before you can harvest it, obviously. You'd have to let it grow, you'd have to take care of it, all those things, with just the knowing. If you knew 100% that this seed you have in your hand or you had would grow into this really resourceful thing that you could retire on, you need to take care of it. And if you knew without a shadow of a doubt that that's what that would do, you would keep doing that, right? And I think that's another thing that Saturn and Taurus really struggles with, is knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that what they're doing is going to pay them long term. And so I think there's a lot of care needed to be done with Saturn and Tauruses and what they plant their intention into and what they make their money with and how they invest their money. That's why really getting early on financial investments is really important for Saturn and Tauruses, to be able to see what they can financially build. And there's going to be financial management. That's a whole lesson for Saturn and Taurus generation. Learning how to manage their finances, how to splurge and not splurge, and how to make their money work for them. I think it's a really big lesson around the Saturn and Taurus individuals, is learning how to make their money work for them, and also learning how to plant those golden seeds. Because, like, for example, back to the analogy of the golden seed that I talked about, if you had this one golden seed that you could plant and it could turn into hundreds of golden seeds in 15, 20 years, and then from there you could then plant all of those seeds into like 15, 20 other trees, and then 15, 20 years from there you would get even more. Like, that is how Saturn and Tauruses need to think. They need to find ways to think about finances and money in a way of investments, because that will be their strongest gift is time. Time is your strongest asset, and as a Saturn and Taurus, your strongest asset financially especially is your time. So if you are a young Saturn and Taurus, and those of you that are Saturn and Taurus right now at the current time of recording this are around the age, give or take, of around 24, I want to say, 24, 25. And this is recorded in like 2024 right now. So right around there, I think, is when you guys are right around there, 24, 25-ish. I would recommend like really, really investing now, even if it's $5 a day, $5 a week, something. Start on it now, because that will help you in the long run. Speaking from a Saturn second houser, I wish I did that. And there was a time I did that it paid me, and it got me out of some situations. So Saturn in the second house will definitely reward you, as well as Saturn and Taurus. With that, I'm kind of slowly moving into Saturn second house story, so I'll get to that in a moment. But so for those of you that have Saturn and Taurus, your Saturn return is not coming around, or for those of you that haven't had your first Saturn return in Taurus, rather I should say, your first Saturn return is coming around 2029 or so, 2029, 2030. So be aware when that comes about the responsibilities that are being brought to you. And those of you that have already had your first Saturn return in Taurus, that will be your second Saturn return. So there's a lot of responsibility that will be had at that time, a lot of lessons that will be brought up during that time too, to kind of work through of retirement, things like that. And if you have Saturn and Taurus, I would love to hear your story about how you've been going through it, how you've been surviving it, what your lessons have been, all those sorts of things. And especially if you've gone through your first Saturn return in Taurus already, I would love to hear more about how that was and what you've experienced from that, because there's so many different things that can be had throughout the Saturn in Taurus story, and how much financial responsibility you've been able to build over your lifetime, and wealth that you've been able to build. So so that's it for the Saturn Taurus portion. We'll move on to the second portion, which is the Saturn in the second house. So I'll see you guys there. Okay, so we have Saturn in the second house. This video is going to be very, I don't want to say biased for me, but it is, because I have this placement. This is my Saturn placement. And so there is a lot that I personally am going to draw on with this thing. First of all, before I get started with that, if you guys don't know your Saturn placement, whether you know it's in the second house or not, check in the description box below and you'll be able to find out if your Saturn's in the second house, and what that means for you. So the reason I like doing these videos kind of the way I've been doing them is because I can talk about, a planet in a sign and then a planet in a house, but the planet in that same house, the second house, doesn't necessarily have to be in Taurus, obviously. And so it can be in a various amounts of ways when Saturn is in the second house. Like my Saturn is not in Taurus, but it is in the second house, and therefore there is a Saturn second house story that I have. But there's many other people that probably have, Saturn in Pisces in second house, or Saturn in Sag, or, Gemini, and things like that have their own nuanced story relative to what Saturn is trying to teach you in that sign, in that house. So I'd recommend if you have Saturn in the second house and it's in another sign that I have already done the series on, which, by the way, all those are going to be linked down below. You'll see all the playlists kind of linked together. You can check out your Saturn placement for that sign as well, which will kind of help you kind of put this all together in your own way. So that's really what astrology is about, is being able to learn this and being able to kind of guide yourself and teach yourself the blueprint that astrology is able to provide you with. So there's a lot of power in this, and I am so grateful to be able to do this series and to just be able to do this as a living too. So with that, so I guess that kind of is a nice segue with Saturn in the second house for myself. So this is what I do for a living, right? I make money through online content, through teaching, through astrology, through various things that are all community-based. All of my money making is community-based, and through kind of like commissions and referrals and networking, all of my money, because Saturn's in the sign of Aquarius, which is all about networking and community building and all those things. And so I kind of want to talk about what Saturn means for me personally, because Saturn is also my chart ruler, so it's a really big deal. And so with Saturn in the second house, with it being my chart ruler, there is a lot of times that I only think about money. And a lot of times that's all I think about all day, every day, is money, in so many different ways. And a lot of it lately, over the last couple of years, has been a lot of lack mentality. And so it's a lot about unlearning that lack mentality, despite going through my Saturn return. And many people speak on, oh, during the Saturn return in the second house, you're going to be super rich, right? And what was interesting is I am rich with Saturn in the second house after my Saturn return, very rich actually, but not in the way that you would think, not in the physical, tangible way. I have a very, very, very rich network of people. I have a lot of people that I know personally that have massive amounts of wealth and massive amounts of influence. And because of that, my network is extremely wealthy, who I know is extremely wealthy. And because of that, that has been able to help me a lot. And I've had a lot of amazing, amazing people around me that have put me in spaces that have created a lot of financial abundance for me and just worth. And the thing is too, what was really interesting during my Saturn return was there was a big imposter syndrome going on, really big, where there's this kind of like really large divide between what I owned and what I had privately, and then the spaces I was being brought into, and the abundance and the luxury that I was surrounded with. There were so many different things that Saturn return taught me as it relates to money and finances. I went from making massive, not massive, but a pretty good, comfortable amount of money to maybe 30% of that in a means of, overnight essentially, and really trying to do the entrepreneur thing and still doing it to this day. It's been, 4 or 5 years at this point. And so there's been a lot of entrepreneurial things. That's what you'll see with Saturn in the second house too. It's a lot about making your own money, creating your own success, making your own resources. And the thing about Saturn second too, it's a lot of lessons around what resources you have and how to manage those resources. So for me, a lot of what I do to make my money is obviously astrology readings. And something I found really interesting, I was talking to my partner the other day about the way I traded one cycle of paycheck to paycheck to another one, because what ended up happening was I would make money through astrology, and then I would use that money to pay to go to events to make more money using astrology. So I would read charts to pay money to read more charts, which is very interesting because obviously astrology rules, well, I don't know if you know this, but astrology is ruled by Aquarius, which is where my Saturn's at. And then in addition to that, community is ruled by Aquarius. So it was almost this arduous nonstop event cycle that I was on, and I'm still kind of on to a degree, that is constantly making money and showing myself to community and kind of finding those people and finding that network, that circle, that will keep me consistently paid, and finding those alliances, those groups that will be able to support me, or those causes rather, that are worth my money, worth my attention, worth my focus. And so Saturn in the second house really wants people to, and it really depends on what sign Saturn's in, because Saturn can be in various amounts of different signs in the second, and it's a lot about being able to manage what you have, whether it's a network, whether it's physical, tangible things, whether it's your own accolades, your own accomplishments, whether it's your faith and your idealization that you have. That's more Saturn in Pisces, Saturn in Sag a little bit. It's really about really building your worth from what you've already been building for such a long time, what things you've built within yourself, and using your resources that you have. And the thing about me is I've learned so much. And you know what's funny? I need to stop myself here because I hate when astrologers come on YouTube and make a video and it's pretty much just them venting and working through their issues on camera about their own placement, because we become so overly identified with our placements that it becomes this like really like gushing, working through our placements kind of thing. And so I knew this would happen a little bit, so I gave myself some extra time. So this is really like my own personal story with Saturn in Aquarius, or Saturn in Aquarius in second. And then I'm just going to kind of detach myself from it and talk about, or as much as I can, and talk about Saturn in the second house. But just a little bit more gushing about my story because I just need to get it out, even though I just said how much I hate it, because it just feels so like, I don't know, narcissistic in a degree, or self-centered. But it gives a lot of context, I hope, because for me, my Saturn return was something that it taught me a lot about the resources I have, and I have a lot more resources at my disposal than I had before. And the thing is, your resources don't always have to be money. And I know that sounds really crazy, but a lot of it that I've been learning is my resources are my people, are my network, are my friends, are, you know, the information I have, and the value I've been able to kind of create, right? The brand I've been able to create, and my foundation, right? I've created this foundation outside of YouTube, right? Mainly in my personal, like Instagram and all the things, my business that has a foundation, and it will always have a foundation. Fun fact too, my astrology business is linked to my exact Saturn return hit, so very interesting in that regard. And so there's a lot of things that Saturn wants you to build and consistently work on, consistently build over time, and put the effort in. And during your Saturn return, that will likely very much shift, but it will shift in a way that will be really be bringing up what Saturn's lessons are in that house, like in that sign rather, and will show you more of like what Saturn really wants you to work with, right? And in Aquarius, in my example, it's community, it's people, it's groups, it's a cause. Right? And so there's a lot of those, and there's a lot of like declaring of your worth, and building your worth, raising your prices, raising your value, declaration of your value. I think that's a really big thing that I have had to learn over the years, is declaring my worth and really not inflating it super, super, super high, but knowing how to like manage and shift around how I view myself and the value that I put into my work. And there was years, I'm talking about years from like at least 2 years of my Saturn return, which the Saturn return is 2.5 years. So it's a long time, where I spent so long fighting myself, thinking that I shouldn't raise my prices on my services. And the crazy thing is I had so much external people telling me, you should raise your prices, you're worth it, you are worth it, you are worth it. And I'm like, no. And it was like I kept myself small, right? And Saturn in the second, that's a big thing. And I think if people with Saturn in the second prior to their Saturn return haven't done that, and haven't been able to declare their worth, and maybe they get too attached to their bank account, or too attached to certain things, as being the only way that they get their value, that's going to change, because it's going to be like, it really wants you to learn what your value is if you had nothing. Are you still a great person if you had nothing? Are you still an ethical, responsible person if you have less to be responsible with financially? So it's like managing the little smaller accounts so you can build those other accounts. And it's been a slow build for me, obviously, and it's been a whole lesson in that, and I can gush on that for forever. But as it relates to specifically those that have Saturn in the second house, not in Aquarius, not like me, not my natal chart, there's a lot here where we see this, kind of like I was just saying, this like needing to declare your own worth, needing to know what your worth is. And the thing about Saturn in the second house, it's gonna give you resources, but it's not gonna give them in the way that you would think. Unless it's in like a very obvious earth sign like Taurus in the second, or even Capricorn in the second. I'm trying to think what else would be really obvious. Saturn and Libra in the second. Any like really prominent Saturn in the second is going to make that like very Saturnian. And when Saturn's in like a really good place in the second house, it's gonna make those resources pretty obviously Saturn. So think of like the typical 401k, the getting a promotion, the becoming the top of your business, kind of getting into marriage too. That's another thing you can see with Saturn in the second house, especially if it's in Libra or linked to the seventh house. You can see marriage changing your financial situation, and a partnership changing your financial situation overnight, right? That's one of the things I think is really interesting when we think about like relationship astrology, is how it links to that second house. And when it comes to Saturn and other signs in the second, there's going to be this lesson around specifically what resources you do have. And so we see that there's like, when Saturn's in Pisces, there's a lot of like spiritualization, idealization, creativity that these people have that other people might not, right? Other people might not have this vision that Saturn and Pisces have that is so beautiful, this kind of like third eye imagination that is going to be real one day, that is going to be their reality, that is going to be their manifestation, and they know it's there, right? Or we see, Saturn and Aries in the second, this is like, oh, I've been working so hard at this thing, and this is what I want to be, this is who I want to be, this is the person I see myself becoming, or the athlete. It's like Saturn and Aries in the second is going to have this quality of it where it's like, okay, I'm working on this body, I've been doing this hard work, I've been working on these things, right? And then I have this vision of who I want to be, what leadership role I want to become, right? How I can manage my finances by myself, how I can do it myself. There's a very like independent thing with Saturn and Aries in the second. Saturn and Gemini in the second. This is people that have a lot to say, but they need to be able to really trim it down to information that is really valuable with Saturn in the second house, and making a lot of money through that. They could have a lot of things they want to say, a lot of books they want to write, but it's like really finding that right book or that right opinion. And then Saturn in like a water sign like Scorpio, Cancer, or Pisces, there's going to all be these emotional things that are going to be attached to this, because when we see Saturn in the second, there is this very emotional quality, especially if Saturn's in a watery sign in the second house. There's going to be this emotional kind of unlearning that has to happen, and this is where you'll see quite a lot of imposter syndrome, or just like emotional kind of lack of deserving and worth. And that's a big thing with Saturn in the second house, is like not feeling deserving, not feeling worthy, not feeling valued enough, not feeling available to have that money and have that finances. And there's a lot there. I think every single Saturn second house and Saturn Taurus person I've met has had this limiting belief around money and limiting concept around money. And there's a lot of like self-worth things that need to be unlearned and readdressed and kind of reframed. And there's so many things that I think Saturn can do in the second house, and I've learned it myself, and I'm still learning it every day. As I wake up every day, think about money. For example, today I was sitting in Saturn Taurus energy, Saturn second house energy, which I'm obviously intimate with my own chart, and there was so much lack that I had felt, so much like uphill battle financially that I had felt recently, and I just feel like my bank account goes absolutely down, and I'm like so linked to that bank account, and that is there is an obvious correlation there, and there's an energetic thing of learning how to manage the physical resources while you have them, or whatever resources are coming to you, knowing how to manage them while you have them, so you can work with them when and how you need to. There's a really big responsibility of resources and responsibility of what you give your attention to, what you give your time to, what you work on, right? It's almost like it's a lot of investing, right? What's really interesting as it relates to this Saturn and Taurus story with me is this series, right? This series is something that it took me 2 years to get back on the train and do it, because I did Aries 2 years ago during my Saturn return, mind you. And now I'm doing Taurus, and it's at a point where this is a very Saturn Taurus statement, Saturn second house statement, where it's like I'm putting my time and energy into creating this thing, into sharing my value, sharing my worth. And right now, currently, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's worth it, right? But I know if I keep chipping away at it, keep putting in the work, keep doing what I'm doing, one foot after the other, one video after the other, it will eventually, inevitably become what I need it to become, and it will eventually pay me in the inevitable future. And that's a lot about Saturn in the second house. A lot of my Saturn second house story too was during my Saturn return. A lot of it was me reframing the way that I look at getting money, and look at it from putting my money into this thing and then getting it back later. And a lot of that for me was doing the event cycle, where I would go and put money into vendor fees and then obviously not get that money back until I did the event. So there's a lot of those things, a lot of reframing around if I can make a sale at this place, that it makes all of what I spent the money on there worth it, right? So there's a lot of different lessons around that that we see with Saturn in the second house. And so I really, really urge you, if you have Saturn in the second house, to do a lot of like money manifestation and money unlearning beliefs, and really like dig into that and dig into the beliefs that you have around money that are limiting you from feeling successful. And there's so many different areas that you can do that in. For me, one of the things that I do a lot is a lot of the mental exercise. That's a lot of what I do, where I will always look at my bank account in a way that I'm like, okay, but I have this and I have this and I have this money coming in this way, and I have, you know, this account over here that has this money and this account that has this. And it's like, it's a lot of money management, and being able to really, really assess that every single day. And it's almost weird because I can feel when I'm doing the Saturn thing and I'm managing the money and I'm, you know, writing up all the different reports about, you know, my financials at that time. And it was interesting because during a little bit prior to my Saturn return, I actually on this channel did videos where every single month I would check in with my finances and I would record a video on my finances for that month. And that was a very Saturnian second house thing. And I think that's really important. One of the things that I've learned from one of my my mentors, which really stuck with me, was like making a date with money, kind of like going on a date once a week with money and having it something that you sit with every day and learn about and look at your relationship and look at your finances and not be afraid of that, you know, credit card statement or the bank account balance or your investment portfolio, whatever it may be. Just really looking at it and developing a good relationship with those physical, tangible resources, with that money, with those things that you have that are causing you stress. Because the Saturn in the second house can be very stressful, very stressful. And I think what I said, I believe it was yesterday with Venus in Taurus, it's almost like when Saturn's in its own sign, which it is for me, it can make those lessons even louder because Saturn's just doing Saturn things. It's not like Saturn's doing Mars things or Saturn's doing Jupiter things. Saturn's doing Saturn things. And so it makes it almost louder of a lesson for me to learn how to be responsible with my finances, learn how to manage my finances, learn to be responsible with my energy and my time so that I can ensure that what I'm putting my energy and time into is making me money. And that's another thing is I've always been this way where I want to be, I strive to be making money like every second. And that's something I'm really learning to unlearn what was blocking me from getting that. And I know inevitably those blocks will come off and I will make, you know, I have multitude of future money coming in. I'm well aware of it. Like it's there. I felt it. Many people have felt it. It's coming. But it's just like an uphill battle before those kind of like, you know, it's kind of like a dripping faucet that inevitably kind of runs more water, right? It's kind of like that starvation, but then as you learn to kind of tinker with it a little bit, tinker with, you know, the pipe and the kind of like, you know, the foundation of that structure that is feeding you that resource and that water and whatever in this example, it will inevitably start working again. It will start flowing healthy, large amounts of sums of money and water in this example. And so think of money as an energy, I think, a lot of it. And there's been times when I've had profound insights into my relationship with money as it relates to it being an energy. And there were so many times during my Saturn return that happened, and many times throughout my life that has been confirmed to me that money is simply an energy, and you must understand that and understand it as simply just something that exists all around us at all times. And it's about reframing our mentality around that. And I think the Saturn and second house people, myself included, we have so much to learn as it relates to the physical, tangible world. Because a lot of us don't have a lot of physical, tangible work. We can because we've learned it, right? Especially if we have like Taurus placements or very earthy placements, we definitely have a lot of physical, worldly experience. But there is this delay within that learning of how we make our money, right? With Saturn in the second house. So that's what I have to say. I really love making this video. Like I had said, with a little bit of exposing myself with Saturn in the second house a little bit ago. You know, this series is something that for me is very Saturn second house for me, obviously, because it's something that is going to take me some time to accomplish. But I do have faith that it's something that if I keep going at it and I keep the consistency of it, once the series is done, I will feel much more solid in my finances, in my value that I'm providing for the world, and I'll be able to kind of sit back and say that really big behemoth of a project is finished, right? And that's a lot of what Saturn in the second house does, and it will be rewarded financially, when you go through these arduous kind of non-stop things. Think of people that go and spend so much time, going to medical school or, going to be a lawyer, and they spend all this time, energy, and resources to really get to that point. That's what Saturn really does in the second house. So I appreciate you for being here. I really, really love doing this. And if you have Saturn second house, please drop down below what your story has been like, what your experience has been like. I love and appreciate every single one of you. And I'm so grateful to be doing this, and I can't wait to see how the Gemini series goes. Love you, love you, love you. Have a great day. And if you guys obviously want to reach out to me, my stuff is down below for any sorts of readings or any sorts of astrology courses and things like that. So feel free to check down below. I love you so, so, so much. Thank you once again for being here today with me, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.